Hey, thank you, Amy. And good morning to everybody in the screen. I think I know most of you, those who don't know, I'm with Prime Point. We're a payroll HR services company. Um, Frank, you made a comment that the routine and the repetitive, many people think of payroll in that way. But I would challenge some people to think about it. Maybe it's more of a strategic thing, depending on your industry, depending on what you're working with and what you're doing. So, um, the reasons to outsource payroll in HR, there's a couple of them that I put right at the top. Managing people, it's a hassle, for a variety of reasons. Many of them regulatory, many of them related to the federal level, to the state level, now to the local level. Um, you're dealing with the laws on leaves, you're dealing with on holidays, you're dealing on tax issues. On any given month, there's changes to the tax regimes, the tax structures that are going on. So you really need to stay on top of that. And, an outsourced company has the resources to do that. Now, the services that we're talking about here can be divided into what I would call the technological data management piece, which would be payroll, time management, maybe a human resource management system to manage the data around the employees. On the flip side of that, when you're talking about the human resources consulting, that's more about managing the people and managing the people from recruiting them to onboarding them to making sure that they're happy, to making sure that they don't sue you, to making sure that they perform at the highest level. And then on the backside, when they finally terminate. So that's kind of the HR consulting piece of it. Factors that I see when I talk to companies on whether they're going to outsource or not, it comes down to the culture of the company. I think Frank mentioned it earlier. Do they have the expertise inside? Do they have the people to manage this? Is it just something they don't want to deal with? Many times it comes down to the number of employees they have. If you've only got one or two employees, not that big a deal. If you've got 50 employees, it starts getting a little more complex and you got to worry about different rules, different regs. The complexity of your industry has another piece of that. Certain industries that we deal with, say healthcare, you've got to manage a lot more data around your employees. A lot of the nonprofits that I know we all work with, managing their employees, they have to staff to a certain level of licenses or certificates in a home. So it's up to managing that data to make sure you do that correctly. The other piece on whether you want to outsource or not, and Frank mentioned this, is the partners that you have that you're working with. Anthony Carlozo and I do a lot of work together on the benefit side of things. Many CPAs I work with, they manage some of the data that I provide to them from my system. So it depends on who your other sources are. The continuum of services that you can do, you can do it all in-house. That's, the way a lot of companies like to do. You can outsource parts of it. So you pick payroll and just maybe do that, or time and labor. Or you can go all the way. Many companies now are using PEOs, professional employment organizations, which actually take over the hiring, the benefits, the paying, those type of things for your employees. So it's just whatever fits your company tends to be where you're looking for. You're also, when you're looking at partners out there, you want to look at the services that they're providing. Is it a bundled approach? Can you pick and choose? You want to look at the prices, obviously. And depending on your business, if you're growing, you want to make sure that the partner that you choose will be somebody that you can scale with. Some companies, you can't scale their product. You have to move from one platform to another, which is the same as changing companies, really. Now, to kind of wrap it up here in my last 40 seconds or so, a great example of where payroll and HR, is a great thing to outsource is the COVID world that we're living in. Many of you are dealing with the PPPs and getting all the data for your loans. You're dealing with all the data that you have to get the loan forgiven. You're trying to deal with remote workers and teleworkers and maybe different tax jurisdictions all of a sudden. The latest thing that I'm reading a lot about is the return to work. How are we going to bring people back? That's all your HR consulting piece that goes with it. And then, as you just commented, Amy, the next time or the next work that we're in, or the return to normal, what is work going to look like in the future? So I find HR consultants on an outsourced basis are great people to bounce that across. So, Amy, that's my 5 minutes.
You're on mute, Amy.
I noticed that. It's telling me.
You're silencing yourself. That's not good.
Yeah, exactly. I told everybody I was going to mute myself. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, I think your points are very well taken. Who has questions for Jerry? If you want to unmute yourself and put it in the chat.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry, this is AJ. How are you?
Good morning, AJ.
Good morning. So a lot of companies today are really looking to redefine their corporate cultures, and HR is an integral part of their business. As a outsourced consultant, how do you integrate yourself, or are there functions that should be left inside the business versus some that lend themselves better to outsourcing?
Yeah, that's a great question, AJ. It depends on the specifics of the company. Outsourcing, there's not one size fits all. Again, as Frank mentioned early on, if it's a repetitive routine and that's what you think it is, if you can find somebody that does repetitive and routine well, and sometimes you find that the companies out there say they do it and they don't do it well, that's a good thing to outsource. If just your business isn't hiring a bunch of people, you're not growing, you're just doing day-to-day management of the employees, that might be an area where you can outsource the HR. But really, if you're looking to grow, you might want to think more about having a professional HR staff there that identifies your culture, identifies the workforce for you. So again, it's company by company.
Okay, we're going to move to Anthony Carlozo.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Hey.
On this glorious Friday. So, I'll kind of start off by saying, in my world, which is employee benefits, consulting, brokerage, and administration, 99% of employers, in some portion outsource that function. Very few, and I'll put in quotes, go direct. And go direct means that they don't use somebody like me or a PEO and they deal with the carriers directly. Very few do it, but the ones that do, typically they feel they can negotiate it better, or they don't want to pay a consultant to do any kind of negotiation. In my view, I think it's short-sighted because the brokers and the consulting firms have access to all the carriers, can use it as leverage. So you're going to also find portions of what our function is. And one of the reasons companies outsource is they don't have the bandwidth to deal with all the complexities. There's the compliance side, there's the administration side, there's the communication, there's the enrollment, the strategy, the ongoing reporting, and what does it mean when you get these reports from carriers, the financial analysis. And what most companies feel is that they'd rather have their HR departments and their CFOs be more strategic than be transactional. So that's why they would use somebody, like us or a PEO. In terms of the administration side, there are some companies that do it themselves. So what you'll see is, some companies might do COBRA themselves. It's almost the same, I would call it exposure if they were doing their own payroll, and Jerry kind of alluded to it a little bit. It's like, why would you want to take that compliance exposure? FSA, online enrollment, even larger companies will find that they do their own FMLA administration, and that gets very hairy. And, you have to have a very sharp internal team to want to do that internally. There's the HSA or HRAs, and I've seen companies do that internally. And again, it's, when you start getting HRA claims and you have HIPAA and you have, all these compliance regulations, and you have to have section, you have to have compliance documents that spell out the plan. To do it yourself becomes, you know, in our view, a little bit risky. It's like, why take that on? So, but most companies will outsource some form, you know, of benefits, because really they want their teams to be more strategic overall than be transactional. And it's going to differ. You know, in my world, I'll see smaller companies and I'll say, you know, start up to 100 employees, you use a PEO, which is totally outsourced, where they're outsourcing benefits and P&C and 401k and retirement, and they'll get into the hiring and so forth. And that's where a company might not even have an HR department, and they lean on a company like a PEO to be that department for them. Typically in my world, they'll have an HR manager, director, CHRO, and we're a piece of that team. You know, we act as, you know, almost a member of their HR team. So most companies do it, and the ones that don't, typically what I find are smaller, or they feel like it's a cost containment measure and they can do it themselves. Any questions?
Does everybody know what a PEO is? Jerry and Anthony both mentioned a PEO. Would one of you just explain that a little bit so everybody knows what that is and how that differs from the norm?
Jerry, you want to
sure.
That and a compliment?
Yeah, again, a PEO stands for Professional Employment Organization. There's a number of national organizations as well as locals that do that. As Anthony said, they'll wrap the whole package together. Many times you join a PEO as a small company to get a better menu of employee benefits, health insurance, or retirement funds. They generally wrap in the payroll services into that. But on the larger size, we've had some, you know, one of our large clients left us because they got better workers' comp rates through the PEO than they could get on their own. So you see the, you know, I would call them the abnormal company to do that at that size. But in their case, they saved, you know, millions of dollars to move from being rated on their own to being part of the PEO there. So, but it generally you'll see it up to, you know, 100, 150 employees, Amy.
Yeah. And what you'll find too is that maybe the company doesn't have the expertise to manage it, you know, is to have, you know, is to use a company like a Tryon or a CBiz to manage it, and they just don't feel like they have the bench strength, so they just outsource the whole thing. Right. There's pros and cons to the PEO approach, and you know, the pros are they make it easy. We're going to do everything. We're going to take it off of your shoulders. You know, what I've seen is as companies grow in a PEO organization, it's harder, because what they do from a pricing perspective is on the benefits, for example, they'll have agreements with Aetna, and their whole pitch is that we're grouping your group and 100 other groups under Aetna, and we're getting you special pricing. And is that true? Yeah, it's true. But after a while, there's no leverage. It's not like they can go to the Blues or go to Cigna or go to any other carrier to, you know, for leverage, because it's a block rating. It's a block book of business. So there's pricing advantages, but there is lack of flexibility, you know, in that environment. They typically pick, whether it's 401k, whether it's benefits, whether it's property and casualty, it's basically one or two carriers they use, and that's it. You know, so you don't get the full range of using the market as leverage.
Anthony, this is Charlie.
Yes.
Is there a particular time of the year where people change carriers or change services?
It's a good question. Typically, most companies will renew their insurance January 1. Typically, I'd say 75%. A lot of nonprofits have a 7/1. You know, academia could have a 7/1. And a lot of it also depends on, you know, their fiscal year. But I would say 75% look at it, you know, they have a 1/1 renewal, which means when you back up, most companies might get their renewal in October, and then you're doing strategy before, so you know what you're going to do before you get the renewal. And so it's an ongoing, process. It's not like you meet once a year and you're like, here are your rates and let's go negotiate it. So typically, for me, where I'll find is that, I'll call it my season of, and don't take this the wrong way, but my hunting season is from January through the end of August. Because after August, typically companies have, wrapped up their insurance, and then you're looking at the following year.
Guys, Bill Borton, let me jump in for a second. Going back to my benefits days, when you outsource to a PEO, you're outsourcing the responsibility, but not the liability, which is another issue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good point.
Bill, very good point. I also want to have Jerry touch base on payroll side. Jerry, when do you see most people switching on payroll? Or when is the best time to switch on payroll?
Anytime they want to switch to me is a good time, Amy. Many companies like to switch first of the year, as Anthony said, they think it's clean. And if you're not switching first of the year, you switch on the first of a quarter because your taxes are filed on a quarterly basis and people think that it's clean. The old company's responsible, up to that point, and the new company takes over. This day and age, you're importing the history year to date generally on everything, and we reconcile back to whatever the other company did. So you can really switch any time, but many prefer a quarter start. Thank you.
Jerry, this is Ben. Are you embedding any kind of payroll application with your service as well? Is there a standard application that you use?
You mean a technology, Ben?
The technology, yes.
Yeah, we have proprietary technology at Prime Point. We've developed ourselves, the same as an ADP or Paychex have their own technology.
Got it. So you basically bring everybody off of their whatever payroll
Platform.
Technology they're using, put them on yours. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And payroll really, I guess in its purest sense, is really data management. You pay somebody an annual salary, you have things that you deduct against it to come up with a net payroll or a net check that you're going to pay to somebody. And it's really just data and managing that. Where it gets tricky is when you add the human resource management element of it and all the reporting things that need to do, like Anthony does a lot of the Affordable Care Act reporting on the backside. Now obviously with COVID, you got to report different earnings to get your loan, forgiven. So it's how the different platforms manage that data and how the staff of the company are able to manage that data. So you got the two pieces there, the technology itself and the expertise that goes with that. Okay.
And is there an employee count at which point you would recommend they keep it in-house versus outsource payroll?
Not necessarily. It depends on company culture. I mean, I do small consulting firms. Early on when I was doing this, an accountant came up to me and said, one of the biggest reasons to outsource payroll, even for a small company, is to keep the guy out of jail, because people, they defer things, and the thing you don't want to defer is paying your taxes. You do that, they come after you pretty hard. Obviously, when you get bigger, you've got more data to manage, and it becomes more complex. There, I think you will see it. But then there's certain industries that have an ERP, an enterprise-wide system, that they have a payroll element. You see this a lot of times, maybe in a professional engineering firm that ties their billing into hours worked that ties back to the payroll. So they might want to keep the whole thing in-house. Again, it depends for company to company and industry to industry.
Thank you.
The important thing is, as Bill said, is, and Frank mentioned this before, I believe, is when you are outsourcing, you may be outsourcing or having somebody else do that from an accountability perspective, but the responsibility is still with that client and the liability, which is really critical. So Bill, thank you for that, because that is very important. The outsourcing person will be a partner with you and should be involved, as Anthony said, but you've got to make sure when you're advising that, you make sure the company knows that they're still responsible for it. So, and to answer your question, Ben, I look at every company should be outsourcing payroll. Nobody should be doing it in-house because and if you've got a huge organization, you've got to have the software that will be updating everything for you. Okay, there are payroll departments, but they're all using some sort of a payroll system and making sure that payroll system is working properly.
Well, I think one of the things that everybody's kind of touched upon that, of my factors that companies look at is companies just don't have the expertise many times to stay, on top of, in Jerry's case, laws in 50 states. And they just don't have they're so busy running the day to day.
Right.
We all spend an hour or two a day staying on top of all that stuff. And that's what they really need to
Exactly.
outsource.
They don't have the bandwidth, to do it all. That's exactly right.
We'd like to invite Valerie. Don't remember what I said on mute. We'd like to invite Valerie Schlitt to talk about how her company helps others to do something that they're not the best at, that they don't have the time for, and that they do it very, very well. So Valerie, you're up, and I'm on mute.
All right. A lot of you know me, Valerie Schlitt, and my company, VSA. And a lot of the themes that we just talked about are going to come out, even though this is a totally different area of the business to outsource. So my company is an outsourced lead generation and appointment setting firm for companies who don't have enough qualified leads for their salespeople to close. When clients come to us, they're either looking for an agency that can both do the heavy lifting of making one cold call after another and qualifying the leads, and who has the expertise, the technology, the database resources to do this in a professional manner, who really knows how to do it. So in short, we're both the labor and the know-how. And that's what people are looking for us to do. And when people come to us, we are not a cost center. We are actually a group that people invest in so that they can get a return. And if we cannot produce a return on our client's investment, our clients don't stay with us. So it's in our best interest to do as well as we can for our clients so that they can stay over a long period. And I guess you all know, but I just need to clarify, there's lots of sorts of lead generation. We are the kind of firm that uses the telephone. We send a few emails, but they're personalized to the particular prospect that we're talking to, and texts, but mainly the telephone to do the lead generation. And we've invested at my company a lot in all the current technology to make sure that we deliver the most. So, as Amy said, the companies that come to us typically have no idea. They might want to try this for the first time, but they don't know whether it's going to work. So they don't know whether they don't want to invest in creating their own internal team. So they're just coming to us for a trial to see if they can get a return on their investment. Or they don't have any idea how they're going to actually build a team, manage a team, what the metrics are, what the technology is, or they don't want to put that whole investment into creating an internal team. And that's where the outsourcing really comes into play, because there's no long-term contracts. There's no overhead that the company has to absorb. People can come on a short-term basis to just do a project. They can stop and come back. They can stop and come back, or they can just need a little boost to get some leads in their pipeline, or new sales. Maybe there's a trade show that they're going to and they need to drive people to a trade show booth, or some specific project. But we also have clients that stay with us for a long period of time. So there's all sorts of ways that clients can come to an outsourced lead generation partner like us. And we can provide all that flexibility that's much different than if someone had to invest in their own infrastructure and then terminate people, bring them back and terminate people and keep hiring people. There's a lot of turnover in our industry. So we have built a culture, talking about culture, we build a culture that retains our employees, but it's really hard to do that. So a lot of times companies just simply don't want to build their own internal team for lead generation. They want to focus on the more sophisticated sales efforts. So the lead generation industry is really fragmented with so many smaller firms. It's kind of like, I think maybe insurance agencies were a decade or so ago before there was consolidation. All you really need is a phone and a computer. There are offshore firms. You've heard about the firms in the Philippines and in India, and there's lots and lots of smaller firms and some bigger firms here in the US that do really low end and high end. And if you're interested in researching how many, you can go to clutch.co, which is a website dedicated to helping clients find firms like ours. And it also is a source for a whole bunch of other outsourced industries as well. You'll see hundreds and hundreds of appointment setting firms, and probably some of the other firms that we're talking about here today too. We are a sponsor on Clutch, so that puts our rankings, our profile higher in the rankings, but there's very many. Now, just want to give you a perspective of what you can find if you're actually looking for lead gen firms. Sometimes companies charge by the lead, but typically they charge by the hour. And the range can be from like $30 an hour. If you go offshore, maybe it's $25 an hour, all the way up to $120 an hour. That's for one person to be making calls for 1 hour. So this wide variety is often due to a firm's sophistication. They've earned that reputation. They can charge that rate, but sometimes it's just due to a firm having established a great marketing presence that makes others believe that they can charge that rate. And there are some firms that they don't care whether they keep people or not. Their whole infrastructure is to get companies on board. They fail, they'll get the next one. They fail, they make money that way through the churn. So I guess that's all a bottom line way of me to say it's a huge fragmented industry, and it's really hard for someone on the outside to know what they're getting into before they actually engage in some kind of a contract. And I'm going to offer some assistance at the end of if you are interested for any of your clients to look at outsourcing lead gen. So for us, our ideal client base is a company whose their own clients have lifetime value of 30,000 or more, sometimes over 100,000. We deal a lot with technology firms that are targeting healthcare or logistics spaces. We also work in many other industries. But there's so many firms that work also in lower end, lower ticket lifetime values or target consumers. So again, to say there's a whole variety of companies out there. Now, as a background, telephone lead generation is part of an overall kind of area within a company called inside sales. And inside sales is the whole movement to separating the more routine aspects of lead gen and qualification from the more sophisticated and nuanced areas of actually closing a sale. And this inside sales really started emerging, I guess, in the late 1900s, but around 2001, it started booming because it was so much harder to travel and voice over IP became mainstream. And then outsourcing that just was a logical extension. And that's where all these firms like ours, my firm started in 2001. I had no idea that we were part of something that was already growing. So I just see that outsourcing lead generation is going to grow. It's going to increase from technology firms to a whole bunch of other industries. It just makes logical sense. I don't see really any end to it in the foreseeable future. There might be some consolidation of companies, but as far as the trend towards outsourcing lead gen, I just see that continuing. And what makes the telephone so great is that it is socially distant. I just want to offer people, it's very complicated, and I will be a resource to you where it's not one size fits all, and I am here to help you if you want to talk to me about a client that you have who may fit us, may not fit us. I know a lot of the players.
Valerie, this is Charlie.
Hi, Charlie.
Good to see your face again, Valerie.
Yes.
Most of us are solopreneurs.
Yes.
May not have staffs or very small staffs. Could you reach back into your client successes and share with us how you help people like ourselves get in front of the decision makers that can write us a check?
There are a few firms that we work that are solopreneurs, and I will give you one example right now. However, my particular firm has evolved as we've been in business for 19 years, and typically that would not be our sweet spot, but I would connect you to some others. But for example, I'm working with a coaching firm in Center City right now, and what we do is they've identified a target market, a particular message. We are making phone calls. It's a two-person firm, so it's not a solopreneur, but it's close to it. And we're making phone calls every week to follow a series of emails that they've sent out. And the offer is for a complimentary introductory meeting for 15 minutes. And then they are responsible for encouraging that client to continue on. So that is one example that we've used.
Thank you, Valerie.
You are welcome.
Hey, Valerie.
Thank you so much. And Mark, you have another question?
Well, it's not as much a question, and this is not, and Valerie and I did not speak ahead of time. This is a disclaimer, and Valerie is not paying me to say this, but my area is in sales leadership, and I liken Valerie's service as a football team, in that her firm is the front line of the offense, right? And they help to move the ball forward, because in more strategic, longer term sales processes, there's really two critical components. One is finding where the interest is for that value of that product or service. And once that interest is identified, it's just getting a commitment to have someone discuss it in more detail. And that's what, a firm like Valerie's does. And it's critical. It's critical in today's environment that's gotten more competitive. And just food for thought, just going through some quick metrics. If your lifetime value of a particular product or service is $100,000 and you have X amount of time for the sales life cycle, the amount of calls in order to get enough initial meetings, which then your salespeople are handed the ball to then get quotes, right, and proposals to ultimately result in an actual sale, could be several thousand phone calls, emails, touches in that front end, that front line. So it is a complex, very specialized skill, and I suggest to many of my clients that they do that. That's not something that should be done in-house. And the mistake I see a lot of sales firms, or pardon me, a lot of companies do, is that they have their sales reps do the outbound kind of prospecting, and then also those same sales reps are developing those opportunities. So if you can segregate those two things and just put sales qualified leads into the hands of the talented salespeople, it's going to speed up your sales cycle times, and it's going to increase revenue. So again, Valerie didn't pay me to say that, but it's definitely valuable.
I think it's a great further explanation of what we do, and especially from a salesperson's perspective.
Yeah.
The other point that I'd like to make is all of us are subject matter experts, so we're trying to position ourselves as such. Tony Robbins doesn't make sales calls, right? Because what happens is his preeminence would drop. We have other people rolling out the red carpet for us to walk in to sit down. So the great and wonderful Jerry Hampton is sitting in front of a CEO. Jerry's not the one that made the sales call, because that would lower his status in the eyes of the decision maker. Very, very important part of what Valerie offers.
Great points.
Hey, quick question for you, Valerie. You've been doing this for 20 years now. I wanted to ask you, what's been the impact of software in lead generation? I hear this a lot, new software coming in and you get leads from software, but you're calling people now. What's your view on that?
Oh, first I was going to answer, there's a lot of software that enhances our calls. Is that what you meant?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. I think firms that are not keeping up with the software are going to be the ones that do not make it as the industry matures. I can go into, we use a lot of software. We're always going to conferences to look and see. It's a little challenge. Well, I'm not going to get into nuances. Since we have smaller programs and we're not one big company that has developed one, there are many firms who have huge inside sales teams and they invest in a lot of technology and it's all the same and they have the same process. We have different processes for each of our clients. So finding the right technology that can be flexible is a challenge to us, but we think we've picked several that are really helping us differentiate ourselves and deliver more value to the clients. And if you don't keep up, it's silly. And also databases. We invest in the Zoom. If anyone wants to buy a list, we can help you with a list, the Zoom Info database. It's extremely expensive. No single person could probably purchase it on their own, but it's a requirement for a firm like us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Valerie. And the comments are these are great. We're going to go now to Chris Scholl to talk about information technology. Chris,
good morning. Thank you very much. I am Chris Scholl, and I've been doing information technology stuff for, 40-ish years now, doing interim CIO work and more recently focused my practice on information security and privacy. But over the years, I've outsourced and either provided outsourced IT services or used other companies to provide outsourcing for a lot of companies, ranging in size from, four people in a startup to 10,000 people in a, $1 billion a year enterprise. Nobody does it all themselves in information technology. A few years ago, I wrote an article called "Friends Don't Let Friends Run Exchange Servers," which Exchange is the Microsoft's big email server platform, and they're very difficult to run, and they're especially very difficult to run well. And so at the time, Microsoft was just starting to offer this as something called Office 365. But if you can buy Office 365 for $16 per user per month, why in the heck would you want to try to hire people to do it for you and frankly do a much worse job? I like to think of the outsourcing as sort of coming in three tiers. There's the stuff that's sort of industry general, the email servers, the running the routers and the switches and the supporting your PCs. That's very generic. You could hire almost anybody to do that. There's the stuff that's industry specific. So a couple of years ago, I was working with a medical devices company they called me in because they had implemented a new ERP system. Well, they partially implemented a new ERP system. And if you ever want to see a CEO sweat, just tell him they're getting a new ERP system. And I may have stolen somebody else's line there. I know I did. But, they had gotten like 2/3 of the way through their ERP implementation and it sort of stalled. And I went in and I found out that their IT department was 2 people. And they had outsourced a little bit of the implementation work, but they'd kind of left it to these 2 guys who already had like full-time day jobs supporting all the other IT in the organization to try to, like, in their spare time, finish this ERP implementation. And so, we ended up finding a company that specialized not in just IT support, but in support of this particular ERP system. And we hired them to manage that system for us and, really took the burden off of the internal team that was doing sort of help desk. Well, the internal team had two guys. There was the help desk guy, and then there was also the director. And the director stayed. We ended up actually getting rid of the guy who did help desk because, frankly, he had a really bad attitude. You know, but the director we kept because he actually worked at the third level of outsourcing, which was the business-specific knowledge. That third party that was doing it, that we were outsourcing all the management of this ERP system to, didn't really understand how the medical devices company did business. They didn't understand their product in detail. They didn't understand that all that other stuff. So they very quickly realized that they needed to keep the IT director because he'd been there for like 25 years and he knew the business inside and out. So, you know, tiering things at the right level is very important. And, you know, so that's what I've done over the years. You know, when it comes to information security, where I focus now, you can't hire enough people to run a 24/7 security operations center unless you're, you know, a Chase or an American Express. Those things should be outsourced just because you can't hire the people you need. You know, often I see these job descriptions that want somebody who's expert at everything. Well, maybe you need somebody who knows how to pull in a resource here on this and a resource there on that, because nobody can maintain a high level of expertise on everything in IT. So I'll pause and take questions if anybody has any.
One thing I like what you said, Chris, is hire the expert for this item, hire the expert for that item. And you can't keep, and people cannot be experts in everything. And that's very, very true. And I think that actually is part of this whole discussion here is we all are not expert. We're experts in one, maybe two, maybe six things, but we're not experts in 150,000 of these. And if you look at running a company, that's what it is. So, yeah, good points. Questions for Chris? Wow. They must have listened to your other session too, Chris.
I solved everybody's IT problems. That's great.
Exactly. Hire you. All right. We're going to go to Robert King on law. And he's actually...
I actually remember to turn mute off this time, so I'm kind of proud of myself, Amy. But
yeah.
But you know, not many people think about keeping legal issues in-house, because the nature of my profession, none of you went into business to spend all your time with lawyers. I can guarantee you that. And you take a look at some clause buried deep in a contract, and you hear the word in personam jurisdiction, and you immediately nod off, and you don't understand. We're the ultimate and necessary evil. At least that's the perception out there. The problem is, so you're saying, well, I'm just going to outsource it to my attorney. Great. But effectively, most of you probably aren't, because in my profession, it's sort of analogous to you have a choice. You can go to the gym now and cut down on red meat, or you can see a cardiologist in a few years and maybe you dodge that bullet and maybe you don't. But if you see the cardiologist at that point, you're in rough shape and the opportunity to head off problems is gone. So again, when you get sued or you're involved in setting up your business or a succession for your business or dealing with some critical strategic contract, you know, well, maybe I need some assistance on this one. But the day-to-day, particularly for small businesses, particularly in a time when your revenue's under pressure, well, we're high-priced overhead. So it's very easy to not talk to your lawyer, assuming you even have a lawyer. The other problem is, of course, is that like doctors, we can be highly specialized. So who should you be talking to? There's always sort of a, in my mind, sort of a supply-demand curve or a matrix that you know, as to whether or not you need legal assistance. If something involves something important to your business, either dollar-wise or just reputation or whatever, then the odds are that you need help in that area is increased. If something is more emotional but low dollar, so there's a process, so for example, possibly hiring a low-level employee also could be increased. So at that point, you want advice on that. The problem is that in most instances, by the time you decide to speak to an attorney, you're already in trouble. Which is another reason why my profession is so popular, because we're always around trouble. Everyone knows they need to speak to someone like Amy to talk about cash flow, or talk to someone about getting their payroll up, because when a problem happens with your cash flow, your payroll, or your taxes, you're going to find out about it relatively quickly. But if you have a horrible clause in a contract, odds are you're perfectly fine until you're not. And at that point, you are truly in deep trouble. So again, the advice I would always give is none of you are going to be large enough to have an attorney on staff full time. That's not something you see in small business. But you want to set up a regular relationship where maybe once a month, once a quarter, twice a year, you go and speak to your attorney and just talk about what's going on in your business and your life. And again, it's a combination of business and personal life, because things in your personal life can have huge effects on your business and you don't think about it. I got remarried last year on March 17th. I started a business on March 1st. I don't expect to get divorced. If I do, it can have a huge impact on my business. Of course, I would have, there's all kinds of advice I would have given someone, all of which I completely ignored for myself. All right. But those are the sorts of things that happen. So again, setting up just an occasional talk about what you're doing in your business or how you're approaching things can have a huge impact on avoiding problems down the road. Something as simple as in the contract template you're doing when you make sales, is it designed in an ideal fashion in a world where you may have trouble collecting payment from people? Or maybe exit, or if you're entering a contract where you're going to have obligations and the person is paying you slowly, can I exit? What can I do? Am I on the hook for the whole thing? What if that business gets sold to somebody else? Can I exit the contract then? What if and somebody else has a weaker financial position? So there are all sorts of basic questions that go to employment, that go to I'm moving to a new lease, that go to just the basics of business, that you really should be talking to an attorney at least once in a while to get their input. And so again, that's not the way most of us approach business. We only speak to someone when it's too late, when we got a real problem. So again, my recommendation is whether or not you're going to a firm, which again is particularly difficult because they're going to charge you for every 6 minutes, or you go to someone who is the equivalent of Amy, but in law, who is a sort of a fractional general counsel, or maybe you can have a different arrangement that better fits your situation. It's something to consider. Or you can do it like Amy and before the world went sideways, invite me to her monthly business breakfast and then ask me how to negotiate a better deal for the car she wanted to lease. And I gave good advice to all of which, again, she ignored. So again, these are the issues. And again, effectively, no one thinks, I assume none of you think you're outsourcing or not outsourcing this particular function, but given how you're approaching it, you probably are. And so that is my high level 30,000 foot advice to all of you. Find someone you trust, talk to them occasionally. And again, remember, like your general doctor, they may give you general advice, and as a consultant, they're going to try to sell you. But depending upon the problem, you've got to ask them deep questions, because they may try to sell you something and it's not an area of speciality. So always ask your attorney how they've handled these matters before, and you should be able to figure out pretty quickly whether or not they're going into a new area and whether or not you're comfortable having them go into a new area.
Bob Taylor Fernley here. I'd just like to reinforce a point you made about a minute earlier, and that is to establish a relationship with your lawyer, with your banker, with your accountant, and not just on a professional level, but on a personal level. I mean, I think the value of getting to know them and them getting to know you upfront and personal is incredible. Plus, we found over the years, by having that relationship, the responsiveness of them coming back to us when we really need them is important. So point being is, don't just go to them when there's a crisis. Try to nurture that relationship on a long-term basis.
There's another thing also, Tim. I remember, I used to be work in-house for a company on Lancaster Avenue. And I would learn more about the problems that were about to hit the company and my desk in the coming month or two, because every 2 weeks I'd go over and pick up bagels or cupcakes for the sales department. Now, no one hates lawyers like commissioned salespeople, because all we do is block sales. But by doing that, I'd hear about the crap that was going on, and I'd be able to head it off and get an idea and sort of structure my approach to things. If you're hiring just an outside firm that's charging you by the 10th of the hour, it's very difficult for someone in my shoes to spend the time to get to know you, because if you're getting charged $1,000 an hour for something, well, you don't want to pay more than the 6 or 12 minutes or that's going to take. And so I'm not going to find out about your business. And there's nothing more frustrating for someone in your shoes, I would imagine, than paying someone a lot of money to give you perfectly sound legal advice that is absolutely inapplicable to your business, because they don't know your business. And again, risks are the interaction of, the contract or the legal regulatory situation and what's going on with you. And so by having that relationship, they can at least have a familiarity and allow them to really give something that's much more optimal when the time comes.
Yep, you bet.
Taylor, I'm really glad you brought that point up, because that's something that we hadn't even spoken about, was that relationship. Because we talked about responsibility and accountability, but that relationship with whoever you are having dealings with. We don't have a banker in the panel today, but that's another area. And you should, as you're, as we all have our own businesses or are in business, anybody that we are working with for the benefit of our business or for another business, you should have a great relationship and know what's going on. Taylor, thank you.
And again, just in particular for my field, everyone knows that accounting touches everything you do in your business. There's nothing you can do that doesn't involve accounting. Law's the same way, but people don't see it until it's too late. We touch everything, but again, it's probably only going to bite you in the rear end once in a long while. At that point, it's too late. So you need to head the problem off up front.
So can you speak for just 1 minute, and I know that's hard, about when for a company that is looking to do outsourcing, from a legal perspective, there should be a contract, for example, right? What are some of the things also from a law perspective that you would want the company to be aware when they are outsourcing to someone?
Outsourcing to an attorney?
No, outsourcing to anybody. So, in Chris's situation where a company's outsourcing some of their IT.
Okay. You're going to want to, again, you got the interaction of legal terms and business terms. So first of all, you really want to look at the business side of things and make sure exactly what you expect is spelled out clearly. And you may think it is, but it's not. I remember, again, when I supported a sales force, I would get in deals all the time. The sales force didn't care about the terms and conditions. They cared about the actual part. And I'd look at them and say to them, if this happens, and this happens, how much are you getting paid and when are you getting paid? And they would look at that and say, well, we're getting paid, $2,000. I said, show me on there where it says that. And you wouldn't be able to figure it out. A contract only really matters on 2 occasions. At the very beginning, if you want to start something, and when something goes wrong. And so you always want to anticipate what's the worst thing that's going on. So if you have anything confidential in your business that you're sharing, you want to make sure it's protected. If they're sharing anything that's confidential for you, or for them to you, you want to make sure that if you have a problem where you get sucked into some kind of problem that way, that your exposure is limited financially. Again, a lot of this will tie back to your insurance. Some things are going to be covered by your commercial insurance, other things won't. So information is key. If you're creating anything, well, who owns it? Whether you're buying the creation or selling the creation. Is it something that is just special for you, where you want to have all the rights locked up to you forever? Or is it just where you've got the right to have it, but the person who created it for you might have a license to use it also in a way that might undercut your sales advantage in the future. So those are things that people don't really tend to think about. But again, the most important thing is really the upfront. What can go wrong right now? You always ask for every section of a contract, what's the worst that could happen? How do I guard against it?
I think one of those items I would be a out clause. You know, what is your out clause? Is it a yearly? Is it a year term? Is it a 5-year term? You know, do you have a 30-day out clause, and how is that done? How, you know, things like that as well.
Yeah, the termination clause, it's what's called the termination for convenience. So if you want to quit on somebody or they want to quit on you, 30 days notice, 60 days notice, or does it have to be where they can quit whenever they want, which of course is going to play a real devil with your potential cash flow. But you can only quit if they are in default of the contract, been in default for at least 30 days, and then they've got another 30 days to fix it. So they fix it, you know, if it's a continuing problem where they fix it and then it goes back into default, it's a bad relationship. Are you going to be able to exit? So it's something you want to look at. Again, particularly in an era where revenue is going to be under pressure on both sides of the equation and where people are going to find ways to cut corners.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate your putting you on the spot then, and you answered. All right, any other questions for Bob? Okay. I'm going to do accounting. For many of you, and for many of your clients, they went into business to sell a service or a product, right? Most people did not go into the accounting side of that business. And it is an area that the company owner has to make sure that they have the responsibility for. They don't have to do it. They don't have to do all the tasks related to it, but they do have that responsibility. So everywhere, there are many, many firms that will do bookkeeping. Bookkeeping can be done overseas. I know Ben and AJ are both very technically oriented. There are many systems that can be used. And the important thing is that service of accounting be done, and I'm going to utilize Taylor's point, is in a partnership, that relationship is there. And similar to the other areas that we've talked about today, the accounting side can be done depending upon the number of widgets being sold and the number of payroll. And it can really it can go from just purchasing the software all the way up to having part-time CFO services or even full-time CFO services. The important thing to note on the accounting side is that it's not something that everybody has an expertise in. I know personally, I do not draw well. I have an aunt who was an awesome painter, and she went to the Philadelphia Fine Arts. I obviously did not get her genes, but I did get my father's genes, who was an engineer. So this is an area also, you have to look at the people who are inside, the number of employees and such, and we've talked before about that expertise. Well, when the whole payroll protection program happened due to COVID, and people were scrambling to get the funds available for a grant that was possibly going to be fully forgivable, I had clients calling me every single hour. They were either going to be jumping off the bridge, the one behind me, or they were going to need my assistance in coming up with these calculations. Being there for them has helped every single one of them to be able to weather this storm. And that's what's important, is it's a partnership. So whatever outsourcing is being done, it's a partnership with your company, or you're advising people to go with a company that you know that does the outsourcing. That partnership, I'm going back to Taylor. I really love what you said. It's a relationship with that client. Okay. I'm going to let Frank go on the tax side unless people have questions for me.
I'll chime in, Amy, about the partnership. I think all of us have that in common. You know, with our clients, we're not vendors, we're partners.
Yeah.
You know, and in my world, I treat their spend like it's my money. And you don't leave any stone unturned, and every year is a new year. And, that sense of urgency to keep proving yourself is what makes that partnership valuable and keeps it going. You know, the reason I think any of us, you know, that are in a sales capacity, or even if you're solopreneurs, the reason you get business is because the incumbent falls asleep at the wheel and they don't take whatever it is that, you know, whatever discipline, they don't take it serious enough to keep, you know, the pressure on to make a difference. And I think that partnership, you'll never lose a client unless they get sold if you have that partnership.
Well put. Very well put. Okay. Frank Siddell is going to talk to us about taxes.
Taxes always comes last, and that's
I know.
my pitch is it shouldn't, right? So, I mean, taxes is one of the areas I think most of us are familiar with outsourcing. Most individuals don't want to deal with taxes. They outsource it to somebody. And most businesses, the same thing, as Amy said. They didn't go into business to know taxes, so they outsource it. And, you know, in general, it kind of works well. But kind of like the kind of piggyback on what Bob was kind of saying from the law side, taxes touches everything. And business owners generally don't know that or recognize that. They're trying to make sales and grow the business. So I kind of view it as a kind of a continuum. You know, if you're not complex and you're pretty static, so you think about the individual that just has a W-2, yeah, they should outsource it. They don't need to know taxes. Outsource it to somebody and get your tax return done down the corner, right? And businesses are, you know, somewhat the same. If you're pretty much static and, you know, stable and not dynamic, you can outsource it, and, you know, 100% of your tax services provided from an external provider. As you kind of grow and get more dynamic, more complex, that's where you really start needing to kind of, one, work with a provider who has special expertise, who can bring you that expertise you don't have in-house. But also, two, the other lever that I kind of, you know, focus on a lot with clients is you also need some of the in-house expertise, because you need somebody who's working with you day to day to talk about, hey, what does this mean to your business? You know, what does this, you know, what your business change? How does this impact? Simple example, I have a client who's a distributor, right? So not to complicate things, but they didn't have to file taxes in a certain state where they had a customer, just because they didn't have sufficient, you know, connections to that state. The customer's a significant customer. Customer said, hey, I want you to have some consignment inventory on our site so I can just pull inventory when I need it. Well, now all of a sudden they have to pay taxes in that state. So their cost of doing business with that customer just went up. So if it's something that they come to me, you know, after the year end and say, hey, we did this, my simple answer is, well, you owe X amount more taxes. But if I'm working with them and knowing what they're doing and talking to them, then I can help them, and they can make an educated business decision of, hey, is this client worth this additional cost? Is, you know, or hey, do I factor this in? Or they can make a decision of how to deal with that. But they can only do that if they know the tax ramifications as they're making the decision. So, I mean, that's where, you know, I kind of say, as you grow and you get complex, you need some, I'll call it in-house, or, you know, we kind of talked about partnerships with the customer or the client to really, you know, it's an investment on my part to really know their business. And it's really, you know, as I kind of said in the beginning, it's an investment on their part to really bring their provider in. And I've kind of found over my years, it's a certain type of client that does that. If they want to just wash their hands and say, I send my taxes off to somebody and they do it, they're going to get one level of service. But if they're willing to, hey, sit down with their provider, build that relationship on their end as well, to have those discussions about what they're doing and what they're thinking about, that gives them a higher level of service and to me, just a better value. And I think that's all of our businesses. The better relationship you have with a customer or a client, you really can provide better services. So, you know, taxes is something, like I said, that everybody outsources, but it's a relationship, and it's building a relationship with a customer, because it's not just preparing the tax return, it's providing the advice. And I think all of us had the same kind of comments of, where we come in and where we should be outsourced is providing that specialist advice.
Thank you, Frank. And yeah, as the CFO of multiple companies, the tax person is always my partner for me as well, because they've got to know what's going on as well. So, all right. Any questions for Frank?
Yeah, I have a question. It's Fred. Frank, with the internet sales and the way states are changing things, what's the law now with if we sell stuff around the whole country, and we used to not have to charge sales tax in other states because they were out of state. So I know that's changing a lot with internet sales. So what's that looking like now?
Well, I mean, Wayfair came out. I mean, you've got economic nexus in all those states. I mean, most states have economic nexus rules, which there's all different thresholds, but they're not very high. So if you're selling things through the internet into customers in another state, most likely you have sales and use tax filing responsibilities.
Yes, Fred.
And filing responsibilities. And right now, it's too early to say how aggressive states are. And right now, fortunately, in most states, tax offices are closed. But at some point, I mean, just like all the businesses are going to be looking for money, right? When we come out of this, Charlie mentioned after we come out of COVID-19, everybody's got to hit the ground running. The states need money too. And businesses are down. They're not going to get the same amount of income taxes and sales and use taxes from their constituents. They're going to be looking for money. So there's going to be state agencies out there auditing income and sales and use tax, looking for money. And so the compliance in that area is not something to be kind of ignored.
Yeah, so Frank, on that, it's about 200,000. If you look, every single state has a difference, as Frank said. Okay, it's how much revenue you are shipping. All right. Now, the good thing is, if you're
some are transaction based too, 200,000 or a certain amount of transactions.
Or a certain amount of transactions, yep. Like 150 or 200 transactions. Every state has, I think there are about 6 different packages, I'll call it, and what the states have decided what to do. But every single state is different. The good thing is, if you are selling to any distributors or a wholesaler, then you want to get the tax exemption from them. Otherwise, if you're selling to the end consumer, you're probably going to have to charge sales tax. And that goes back to an area of who's doing the sales tax for you. Are you doing it in-house? Are you outsourcing the rules and regulations? Because there are companies such as Vertex, which is located right in King, Prussia, Avalara, and others, which will attach to the software system that you're using on the purchases to be able to do that calculation. And they may or may not do those returns for you as well. And that goes back to the whole compliance. So you've got to look at the whole process of what you're doing, where you're selling, how you're getting those sales tax in, and how you're sending that back out. It's very similar to payroll tax and its complexities. Okay, we've had a couple of people already drop off for their next calls. All right, but I do want everyone to get a chance to say any other general comments before we start with the 30-second introducands.
Amy?
Yeah, just kind of, sorry.
Go ahead, AJ.
Just one comment I'd like to hear the panelists speak about is how they show points of differentiation in a sea of similar providers. I mean, many of these services are commonly offered by many. So what do they do differently?
I'll take that one first, which is my area number one is virtual. And that has been the way I've operated my company all along. And for somebody who wants it in-house, that's not my area. So that's number one. Also, number two, that didn't change then during COVID. And the difference for me is, I think I provide an area of trust and integrity and that relationship. I really, it goes down to, I get to know the people. And if we're going to work together, it's going to be very, very close. I want to know, and when you're looking at finances, I get to know all the good and the ugly. And I think someone else mentioned it before in terms of personal. I often get to know the personal because the business and the personal there may be not too much of a differential. What happens in the personal life affects the business and vice versa.
I'll take a stab at that too, AJ. So, in my world, I try to separate myself in two ways. One is, I wouldn't say doing work gratis, but we'll do an analysis, or I would call it some kind of diagnostic. And sometimes when you do that, instead of telling them how wonderful are, they see it. That's one way. The other way, which I'm finding a lot of traction with, is really showing them that you're a good business fit. And business fit is really knowing about their business, strategically what they're doing, reading their 10K reports, going through and then doing interviews, not just with your decision makers, but people within the company to give you insights of how your approach and your company would be a better fit than somebody else. And I can tell you most consultants will probably talk about how wonderful their company is, but they don't talk about business fit. And I'm finding that that's a separator, and that's talking, and you might not have, an opportunity to talk to an executive, but if you're able to bridge that conversation with maybe somebody close to them or a consigliere, you'll find a way to create a business fit. So I know it's a little conceptual, but.
Yeah, my
We offer a 1-week cancellation option, which is not typical in our industry. And we also have a test drive where someone could sit with us for one day and see not only the productivity, but we'll show an analysis of your list and what it's like to work with us. You get to meet our team and see what it's like to partner with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, similar to everybody else here, I think the differentiator, a lot of us are solopreneurs, it's personal experiences and, establishing value with a customer or a potential client. I sit down with my clients every year and go over a value report. Here's what I worked on with you, and here's the value with it. And that value might be dollars saved or dollars, not wasted. And it might be time or just other business improvements that helped with. So it comes in many cases. And, when you talk to a prospect, a lot of us, aren't the big name companies. So, it's good to talk to my other customers and see how they like working with me. And that's the biggest differentiator.
Yeah, for our company, it's, as I said a little bit earlier, AJ, everybody's got the technology or says they have the technology, but you got to combine it with the people who understand the technology, understand the expertise of the business. I think many have had relationships with the ADPs, the big guys of the world. They're great companies that do a great job, but you can sometimes get lost, with a company that big. Here, I think with Beacon, it's all about the relationship, as Anthony said, and making sure that you do the right thing. You have the expertise to understand somebody's issues, what they're trying to do, and you find a solution for that. So that's how we differentiate.
The question you asked is Taylor Fernley's favorite question. If you ever network with Taylor, he'll say to you, what differentiates you? Come on, give me some help here because I want to help you, right? People buy you. Research says that professional service providers, people buy them. And the insights, like Anthony said, the insights about their business, how we can make them better. All the people we interact with have jobs. They want to keep those jobs. They want to get promoted. Our job is to help that happen for them and for their company. So it's really us that's different. People buy Valerie. That's who they end up buying. People end up buying Bob King. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And I also want to say something for a profession that wasn't represented on your panel, and that is your business coach. If you don't have one, you can finish the sentence. Taylor will finish it for you, but you can finish the sentence. You need that coach. somebody's got to kick you up on the side of the head and remind you, what are you thinking? Because sometimes we're self-delusional about ourselves and our future and our potential. We need somebody to keep us on the right course. So I offer that to the group.
All right. Do we have, is Chris still on? Chris is on. Chris, do you want to try just one more time?
I can try one more time. Is that working?
There you go.
It is working.
Yeah, it's being up here in the north woods of Pennsylvania, I'm at the end of a tin can and a string, I'm afraid. I don't know if you've heard the term DSL connection lately, but that's all I can get. So I think I try to differentiate myself by having a tin can. No, that's different. I try to differentiate myself by, speaking in public, events like this, but other ones as well, and telling stories that people can relate to. I think that's, really how I try to, get my business to come in the door.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.